We'll just start with an adoption of the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, opposed, carried. I'd like to begin the meeting by just acknowledging that we're here today on the traditional territory of the Kakite First Nation and the Coast Salish people. I'd also like to invite a new member to the Mayor's Council after the recent election at Electoral Area A, Director Jen McCutcheon. So welcome, Jen. We will show you the secret handshake after the meeting. Okay, moving forward to the approval of the minutes from May 23rd. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And we're going to move to public delegations. We have 5 public delegations this morning. Our first speaker is Roderick Lewis.
Good morning. I'd like to just, before I begin, ensure that you all have the paper handout of my submissions. It's a 2-page document, 4-page I should say, but probably 2 pages is double-sided. What I'm here to speak to this morning is item 3.3 of the public agenda, which is the update on the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain line project. I'm here to request that the Mayor's Council will pass a motion today directing that the chairperson or another appropriate representative will immediately write to the Federal Minister for Infrastructure and Communities requesting commitments of sufficient funding to pay for all of the projected $1.3 billion shortfall in funding for the Surrey to Langley SkyTrain project. Most of you, I hope, remember that the initial and existing approved funding for the project is about $1.6 billion of provincial and federal monies. The project itself is intended to and expected to cost about $2.9 billion. So there's $1.3 billion shortage of funding. I'm also here to request that you'd immediately have your chairperson write to the Federal Minister of Infrastructure and ask for the commitment of funding to pay for at least 1/3 of the Massey Tunnel replacement costs, whatever they happen to be once they figure that out. Why is this needed? Because there's a federal election coming up, and if you don't get the commitments out now, you won't get the funding very likely after the election's over. This would not be a new process. The federal government did commit funding for the Broadway subway project in its 2017 and 2018 budget. This was 1 year previous to the business case being released for the Broadway subway project. So money could be committed and has been in previous mega projects been committed by the federal government previous to a business case being prepared. And I raise this point because, as we all know, the business case for the Surrey to Langley SkyTrain line has not been approved or even created yet. Additionally, I'd like to focus on not just the Mayor of Richmond, but he's one of the main parties at a meeting several months ago in which there was a motion passed to penalize Surrey taxpayers for the contemptible conduct of the previous Surrey Council and the previous Mayor's Council when they made decisions to have a streetcar line, a network of streetcar lines, in fact, built south of the Fraser, when at the time there had never been any public consultations in which the public were asked, the south of Fraser city's public, do you want SkyTrain lines built south of the Fraser, or do you want streetcar lines? This council, you members today, I say, have an obligation to reverse the motion that was approved, and Mike Buda may be able to correct me if I'm wrong in the date, but I believe it was the December 2018 meeting of this council when it was still new. The decision was made to, at a later date, penalize Surrey taxpayers because Surrey Council at that time had made a decision to cancel the streetcar project and replace it with a SkyTrain project. It's unreasonable and unfair to expect business owners and residents of Surrey to pay for the contemptible conduct of the previous mayor's council and the previous Surrey council. And by that, I'll say again, by their not taking the time to ask taxpayers what is their preference. Do they want a SkyTrain line system or a network of 19th century streetcar lines? Those are my submissions pretty much in full. Again, I'm requesting a motion would be passed today. And the last 2 pages of the handout that you have before you is a letter that I received dated June 14th from the Minister of Infrastructure, in which he states there have been no requests for funding. June 14th this year, he states in his letter to me, there have been no requests for funding to pay for the Surrey to Langley SkyTrain project. There should be requests put in now, not after the upcoming federal election. Any questions? Any comments, please?
Okay, well, thank you very much for your comments, Roderick. Our next speaker is Patrick Condon. Thank you, Roderick.
You're not going to ask members if they have any questions before you shuffle me out of the room?
No.
I can tell you're interested in the public's input, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I want to thank you all for making time in your very busy agenda for this public delegation. 5 minutes is not a lot of time, so I will be very brief. First, my name is Patrick Condon, and I am a professor at the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at UBC. And while I did use the interurban corridor, which is the subject of this delegation, as the subject for a research project early in this year in our UBC Masters of Urban Design program, for which we have this publication, which I hope each of you can get in the fullness of time. I am not here in my UBC capacity, but rather as a member of the Fraser Valley Community Rail Committee, and I speak on their behalf. Other members of the committee are here with me today. They include Roy Mufford, Scott Thompson, Lee Lockwood, Britt Gartner, and John Bissers, who are in the back of the room, all of whom volunteer generously of their own time simply because they hope to make the Fraser Valley a better place for them and their children. Today, this committee wishes to table a detailed report on the interurban corridor with copies for each of you in attendance. This report provides an important alternative to the staff report issued on this same topic. Secondly, the committee hopes that at some future date this summer you will allow a 1.5-hour presentation by our committee such that they could more clearly express an unfiltered view of their hopes and dreams, and that a productive back and forth dialogue might ensue in the best tradition of democratic discourse. I hereby make this request. I am also tabling a detailed response to the staff report of my own, which is being passed around at the moment, authorized by the committee for your review. Time will not allow me to read it here except for the conclusion, which in my mind is the most important part of the text, as follows. Our many detailed responses are provided in an attempt to clarify what appears to be a deep misunderstanding on the part of Translink staff with regard to the interurban proposal. However, this discussion may obscure the main point. The main public benefit of the proposal does not lie in how fast a few commuters might get from Langley Center to downtown Vancouver, but rather in how we might lay the spine for a more sustainable south of Fraser region. This region is experiencing explosive job and population growth, partly or largely driven by the exorbitant cost of housing closer to Vancouver. This growth, now almost entirely car-dependent in form, has led to a region-wide gridlock. This gridlock is particularly severe on Route 1, where travel times during rush hour have slowed to a crawl and where idling cars foul the air of the entire valley floor. We are suggesting that at a very low cost, even just the cost of a few vehicles at first, interurban service could be resumed and could start to restore the walkable, transit-oriented structure that gave birth to the valley economy in the first place. What we are talking about is providing the same access to rail service as your Fraser Highway proposal, SkyTrain proposal, but and serve about 8 times the population for 1/3 of the cost. I thank you for your attention this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Our next speaker is Greg Pitipes. And we'll just take a moment for the information to be handed out to the Mayor's Council.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mayor Richard Stewart.
I was sorry, my apologies. I was going to take the opportunity of response to the delegation, but I'll use the opportunity to apologize for being late. But it isn't possible, as for reasons that you know, to get from Coquitlam to New Westminster by car. So my deep apologies.
Okay, we will move on with our next delegation. Greg, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for all of you taking the time to listen to the public so that we can get a chance to express our views. And as I've explained at a couple other previous meetings, I'm here to help everyone try and understand railway technology. I drove the modern streetcars for the Olympics, and I've driven both in Vancouver and in Surrey for the historic railways. So I've driven the very old from 1905 all the way to 2009 Bombardier Flexity streetcars. An interesting thing happened a couple weeks ago. My brother called me and he said, I was watching an old Charles Bronson movie, and he said, it was in LA, and they said, we're going to work on the SkyTrain. And I thought, well, where does this come from? So go on to Google, and of course, it turns out in the submission that I've provided to all of you, that the SkyTrain was actually a British, and it was called Laker Airways. It was a service that provided a direct connection from London to Los Angeles. Now, unfortunately, the company, and it was the first company to ever have a low-cost flights where you could walk in and get a low-cost ticket and take a direct flight without booking. Unfortunately, the company went under in 1982, and somehow that is how we got that name, because our first choice was Skybus, and of course Airbus was still in effect at that time, and we've chosen to take the name of a service. The other things that I've provided to you again is the difference between, or rather the similarity between our Canada Line SkyTrain car and the Calgary Sea Train, which is also a SkyTrain, because all we're doing is we're talking about service. And that's what we're trying to provide to the public at the best cost that we can get for the efficiency. I've actually run all of the numbers, so I know exactly how many cars Calgary has. So basically what you're looking at is if you're considering a 6-car train, Calgary can service about 1,500 people for each 6-car train. Now, if you're talking about SkyTrain, you're talking about 480 passengers for a 6-car Mark I, or if you're talking Mark II or Mark IIIs, you're talking a maximum of about just under 800 passengers. So the big difference, though, is the fact that you're using linear induction, which is $29 million per kilometer. That's a big expense that could be put into cars. As I spoke last time, Bombardier also makes a standard rotary induction SkyTrain like car. It's the same car, but it just has different motors. But you're still faced with the big fact, and you can run it all on the same existing track that you already have. But the big problem you're looking at is you're looking at explosive growth all over the Lower Mainland. You're also looking at the Broadway subway, and you're looking at a subway. You're trying to duplicate what Toronto has. So if you're trying to look for the future, you're looking at a maximum of 800 passengers per train. So would you rather have be able to carry 800, or would you rather have 1,500? And Calgary's trains can actually connect even larger. But you're talking almost double the passengers, and if you build the stations so that you can have that size capacity in the future, you can just move movable walls as growth applies rather than going the reverse way. The other benefit is that you have the Canada Line. Unfortunately, what we did with that was we used 2/3 size cars. Those cars are actually, if they're built to standard form rather than a custom build, they're the equivalent of what Calgary is using. So they could carry 1,500 passengers as well. Now, the other thing that I'd like to also mention, because there's a study that came out. I wrote an article actually back in 2011 that was published in the Georgia Strait, which was for your part. It actually shows that our high-rise developments are less sustainable than suburban sprawl, and this is from a Chicago study. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for your time and all of your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. Our next speaker is Anna Bew.
All right, good morning. Thank you so much for your time. I'm very honored to be here. My name is Anna. I'm here representing Metro Vancouver Alliance on behalf of our 44 member organizations. Our alliance is made up of civil society organizations across faith, labor, community, and education. I'm here to speak to you about HandyDART services and how important they are to our member organizations. Our alliance appreciates that you've already identified that current service rates are not enough to quote the Mayor's Council backgrounder. Demand for this service is expected to increase as the population of the residents aged 70 plus increases by 55% over the next decade, and as the provincial healthcare system continues to shift more services to the community-centered care. So together, our organizations represent 250,000 people in the Lower Mainland, and we all share this concern. The Metro Vancouver Alliance has worked extensively within communities and stakeholders to foster a society where everyone has the means to participate